Stay on.
What is up, everybody? Welcome back to another great episode of the College Football Cut. I am your host, Adam Mack. Usually, I am joined here alongside my boy, Jerred Tarrell. Jerred, unfortunately, has to pretend to be an adult tonight and has to work his real job. However, we are joined by a great guest, Mr. Jeff Bell. Jeff, how you doing tonight, man?
Fantastic, Adam. Thank you so much for having me on. Certainly excited every opportunity to talk college football. Love college football. So, I work with Christian Williams over on the Devi Royale. And so we do our college football show over there on Tuesday nights at 9:30. And so I'm happy to hop on here and help you guys out. I love the cut. And so I'm appreciative of the opportunity to get on air here.
Absolutely, yeah. When Jerred mentioned that he couldn't come on, and I really had no other guest, the first person Mr. Christian suggested was you. He said he's the biggest college football fan he knows. So, easy. That was an easy choice right there. But obviously happy to have you on. We have a lot in store. I'll just kind of start off. For you, week 5 or week 4, what was your biggest takeaway from this week?
Biggest takeaway was probably how good Arkansas looked in playing Texas A&M. We saw the game against Texas. They looked fantastic in that game. And then to come out and beat Texas A&M by 10, that would be the biggest thing. Probably 2. Clemson losing, obviously, would be a huge takeaway. And Clemson's season is over now. And for the most part, I'd be shocked if they can get back into the college football playoff. Like, it would be a wild circumstance for that to happen. Oklahoma surviving, that's another one that, and they're kind of in that zone where they've played a couple games now where they, Nebraska was closer than expected, Tulane was closer than expected, and they escape against West Virginia. So basically it was one of those going in, we knew it would be kind of a quiet day, but then it always turns out those quiet days end up a bit more interesting than what you really expect.
Yeah, absolutely. It was crazy. Like, you look at the games. I remember preparing for last week's show and trying to find games to talk about, and there really wasn't anything that I had circled on my paper 100 times. Like, oh, this is a game I want to watch. I obviously know the Texas A&M Arkansas game. That wasn't a game we had circled on our calendars to start the year, and it turned out to be not only a good game, but we saw how dominant Arkansas is. And a few weeks ago, I wrote an article about, what the Big 12 and SEC shakeups, what they're going to do on college football. And I literally wrote in it, Arkansas is the armpit of the SEC. I even Googled a picture to put in the article and everything. And then they come out and do this, and it's like, they're not just a surprise team this year. They're competitors. Everyone's talking about Alabama and Georgia this year. Arkansas went out and played 2 top 25 teams, 2 good programs in Texas and Texas A&M, and dominated them in both games. So Arkansas is not just a Cinderella team this year. They're making contenders for the SEC this year.
Yeah, absolutely. Treylon Burks, he might be the very best wide receiver in college football. So they've got that going for him. They've got explosive athletic backs. KJ Jefferson, the athletic quarterback that can keep the ball moving. But then you go to the defensive side of the ball, and that's where they really stand out. So they've got enough playmakers on offense to make plays and win some of these games. But that defense is one of the best in college football.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, I'm a big defense guy, like defense wins championship kind of guys. And they're proving that, they have one of the better defenses in college football, and especially who they have ahead of them, with Alabama and Georgia still in the SEC. They're both good offensive teams. That strong defense is going to help them a little bit later down the season, especially, this week playing Georgia. But one thing you kind of touched on earlier was two teams that I think going into the year had one thing on their mind, and it was championship or bust. One team is completely shot themselves in the foot, and they're not making the playoffs. One, I think, barely, but what the hell happened to Clemson and Oklahoma?
And I don't know. So Oklahoma, it's just Spencer Rattler, man, because that defense, Oklahoma has a defense, and that's the first time that we've seen that in a while. If we would have had traditional Oklahoma defense, they probably would be sitting on a loss or two right now.
Yeah.
It's really just been Rattler struggling there, and he just hasn't developed at all this season. He's reverted realistically back to what we saw early last season. I talked about it Tuesday night. We saw him benched against Texas last year because he was really struggling with turnovers. He was putting the ball where he shouldn't. He came back in that game and he played much more conservatively the rest of the season. He kind of got the ball to his receivers, allowed them to make plays versus forcing things down the field. And then you come into this season and he's just right back to square one where he was at the beginning of last year. And so that certainly raises red flags, especially in a year that he was expected to contend for the Heisman Trophy, in a year that he's looking to improve his draft stock. All those things, everything was set up this year for Spencer Rattler to run the table, put Oklahoma in the playoff, and they haven't lost yet. So they certainly have a great opportunity of still making the playoffs because the Big 12 is what we know the Big 12 to be.
Right.
But, Lincoln Riley, it does kind of seem like they usually figure out a way to lose the game, and they've flirted with disaster multiple times this year already.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you touched on it perfectly. Spencer Rattler has been one of, if not the biggest disappointment in college football this year. But you kind of think of the argument is, were we overhyping a bad quarterback? It's easy to say that any quarterback right now, and that if you would plug anybody into his situation right now, I feel we'd be talking, just as much, just because Lincoln Riley has 2 Heisman trophies, a runner-up in his trophy case right now in 5 seasons. It's absolutely remarkable. Spencer Rattler is the #1 quarterback recruit in 2019. He's supposed to be this next great quarterback for Oklahoma to help continue the legacy. Is he just, you wonder, is he just not performing, or is he just not a good quarterback in general? And the more you watch, it's just, he's just not a good quarterback. He made terrible decisions last week against West Virginia. Bad throws, throwing in the triple cover, and even some games last year, he's overthrowing the receivers. You start to think maybe this kid wasn't as good as we thought he was going to be from the start. Everyone was saying he was Heisman. He was the lock for the Heisman. He was an overwhelming favorite. Right there should tell you he's probably not going to win the award. He's not even going to get an invite to New York at this point. And I was talking to Christian about this. He's not going to be a first-round talent the way he's looking. NFL coaches he has Lincoln Riley. He's going to turn it around. At some point, you got to judge what you see, and you can't keep banking on it's going to be Lincoln Riley. Lincoln Riley is going to get me to glory. You still need to be a good quarterback. Baker, Kyler, Jalen, all great quarterbacks. Spencer Rattler, he's just such a big disappointment, and that's led to kind of Oklahoma's degress and overall just failure of a season.
Yeah, he's got tools, but it's the 6 inches between the ears. It just, I don't know if it's just overconfidence in his ability or what's going on there. I think that we've seen enough that we can kind of gather some evidence that, I don't know, we're not there. We don't know if he's putting proper preparation in or not, right, or what's going on there. If he's just got the attitude that, because he was on the Netflix show. No,
yeah, QB1.
Yeah, QB1. There's some clips from that, and there's enough around there that Spencer Rattler believes in himself very much so, probably to his detriment. And I think that it's fair. And yeah, we've seen quarterbacks like that, and they don't work in the NFL. They just don't. It's very rare that guys that can overcome that and become real NFL prospects, real NFL started quarterbacks. And so, if he were to get into a room with NFL teams during an interview, how would that go? it's interesting because it's certainly not what we expected to see.
Mhm.
And you almost feel, like, man, I wish that Sam Howell and Spencer Rattler could trade places because,
Right.
put Howell in that Oklahoma offense with Lincoln Riley and let's
Mhm.
see how he can cook. And then, let Spencer Rattler go, whatever is happening over at North Carolina with. So,
Yeah.
you feel bad for some of these guys in the situations that they're in. And then you've got some guys in fantastic situations failing to take advantage of it.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, you hit it right on the spot. It's Spencer Rattler has the best situation in college football. Any quarterback would want to be, getting mentored and coached by Lincoln Riley if they want to succeed. They see what Kyler Baker and Jalen are doing in the NFL. I know one thing I've kind of realized is going into the season, the expectation was, Spencer Rattler, Heisman Trophy, easy. Spencer Rattler, first overall pick next April. I'm not sure about you, but he's not a first round pick right now, first overall pick, and he's not a first round talent at this point. What are your thoughts kind of going on? Is he the first overall pick, or is he a day two kind of guy?
He's going to be lucky to not get benched, to be completely
Mm.
honest with you. The way that he's played, the way those fans were cheering for Caleb Williams.
Still the highlight. I think that was the highlight right there of the week.
It's wild. It's wild that they were chanting for Caleb Williams in that game. And if they do drop a game, you have to wonder if the questions come into Lincoln Riley. I imagine the questions are already there in Lincoln Riley's mind.
They have to.
If they do drop a game, is he going to see what he's got in Caleb Williams? And if that happens, can Rattler even enter the draft, or does he need to enter the transfer portal and go somewhere to try to reclaim some of his lost luster? That might be the real question, that we're not even talking about the draft with him. But again, he seems like the type of guy that he might blow that off and he might still go to the draft anyways. And so you just don't know what's going on. And certainly, I don't know. I don't want to speculate on personality on a guy that I've never met or don't really know all that much about, but there's certainly fair to have questions about those type of things just from the evidence that is able to be gathered.
Yeah, again, Spencer Rattler, I don't want to say, I don't want to comment on his attitude and everything, but you brought up a good point of, is he ready for the NFL? And that's one thing I didn't even kind of think of. You always college athletes are all the same. They want to go pro. That's all they have on their mind. If he goes, enter the transfer portal, has an even worse year. He goes from a $5 million guaranteed contract to practice squad. So it's all about money. It's all what they're thinking right now. I remember Matt Barkley when he was coming out of college. He's like, he's first overall pick. He gets hurt, but if he goes this year, he's gonna be the first overall pick. He decides, get healthy, go back to USC. I think the Eagles took him in the 4th or 5th round, and he's been a nobody since. He gave up all that money to take that risk to go back to USC and get healthy. I don't see Spencer Rattler as that guy who goes, I care about how my body, my performance. I think he's more so, I want the money. How can I get that quicker? He's just not performing well. And I think it's holding Clemson back. But I keep wondering, what kind of quarterback is he? Is he really a bad quarterback? Now, I wonder if he was at a different school, like, say, Florida, even maybe Ohio State. What would he look like in that offense? Was the pressure too much for Spencer Rattler at Oklahoma, or was he just not a good quarterback?
The guy that he reminds me of is J.P. Losman. So if you're old enough to remember that or not, he's very toolsy. So he's got what you would want to see there. But like J.P. Losman had a great arm, but he just never could quite put it together mentally. Mm-hmm. That's kind of where I am right now with Rattler. He was hyped enough coming out of high school that if he were at another program, we'd still have our eyes on him. But I think you hit a great point with Matt Barkley. Jake Fromm's another guy where these guys are coming in and we're expecting big seasons in their last years. They don't exactly deliver, and all of a sudden a top 10 pick turns into a day 5 or 6 pick, a 5th or 6th round pick. And it's fair to question about where the NFL evaluation really is on these guys. And is it media? Is it media that's created Spencer Rattler as being the number 1 overall pick? Whereas NFL teams, like we're talking about, NFL teams might have viewed him as day 2 or second and third round pick coming into the season, that he had work that he needed to do, and they're not showing it. So I think it's always fair. Always, you need to take everything with a grain of the salt around the draft, especially a year out, because media is trying to build and paint the picture and go through the season. And even during the pre-draft process, especially with the quarterback position, the media that is around the draft is positioning guys to essentially turn the draft into a TV show. And we've always, there was the Johnny Manziel sitting in the green room. Teddy Bridgewater was a guy that sat a little bit longer than what, Teddy Bridgewater's another example. Going into his last year, it was the expectation, like, this is the guy that everybody's going to go, that everybody wants. And he turns out to be a second round pick. And so it's just, we've seen this over and over again. And part of it is the media building this up more than what is expected. But part of it is also that whole year under a microscope. And it allows a guy like Joe Burrow didn't have the same pressure, same looks at him coming into his last season. And so he's able to explode and get on the rocket ship and go. Zach Wilson's kind of the same thing, where he didn't come in with high expectations his last year. And so he wasn't picked apart like Justin Fields kind of was. And so you even look at the situation last year in last year's draft, where Justin Fields was under the microscope the entire season, and that year was a mess for Ohio State anyways. It's a minor miracle they made it to the national championship game, or that they were even able to play football. But it's just a narrative that we've seen time and time again around the draft.
Yeah. This draft, I think, for quarterback position is not strong, especially when you compare it to last year. You had 5 guys who were in the conversation for good, possible franchise quarterbacks. Right now, I don't see any quarterback in this draft being that guy. Like, I want to start my franchise over with this guy. Spencer Rattler is definitely not a guy like that right now. He's not playing himself into a starting role. Is there a quarterback right now that's played, kind of played better than you expected that should be, a possible franchise talent? For me, I don't see any quarterback right now who's worthy of that attention. One guy that I kind of think is going to make his way into the quarterback one role is Desmond Ridder for Cincinnati. He's not getting the attention and like you put it on point, like the media attention. All comes down to the media. Who's the media talking about? Who does ESPN think is going to be the Heisman Trophy? Because we're going to pay them a lot of money to say something really stupid, like Trevor Lawrence is the greatest thing in the world. I think Desmond Ridder is that guy that, if I want to start an NFL franchise, all the quarterbacks in this draft, this is the one guy for me. He can win the game with his arm and his feet, and he's been incredible at Cincinnati as long as he's been the starting quarterback.
Yeah, I think this is a big weekend for the 2022 draft quarterback class, because you mentioned Ridder. He's going up against Notre Dame. That's his highest profile game by far, unless Cincinnati has a miracle run to the college football playoff. And then you look at the Georgia-Arkansas game. If JT Daniels is able to continue to develop and step forward, that's another guy that could work his way into the conversation as together a potential college football playoff run. And then the other guy in the other big game would be Matt Corral out of Ole Miss. I think that he shows you a lot of what you want to see, a lot of what NFL teams like, his ability to make throws from different arm angles, off platform, those type of things that they're really looking for, much in the vein of Zach Wilson in last year's draft. And so he's got a huge opportunity going against Alabama. And if it is a great weekend to really separate. And, I still believe in Sam Howell. I just think he's put in a very difficult situation right now. And maybe he's a guy that slips a little bit in the draft, but that seems like the type of thing I could see him ending up in, like, Pittsburgh. And all of a sudden he's like, oh yeah, he's really good. And he's going to be a franchise quarterback for the next
year. Absolutely.
And, but yeah, it's going to be interesting because I do like Ridder. And he's a guy that I was higher on coming into the season. I think he's got a lot of the tools that you want to see. The Indiana game, he struggled with turnovers. And so if you can take that away against Notre Dame, that would go a long way towards kind of solidifying his stock there. And so I'm excited for this weekend.
Yeah, again, this weekend I feel like there's a lot more excitement there hasn't been like that many hype moments for this season, which is weird because I feel like going into the year there was so much hype and attention on this year, but this week I think we're going to start to see a lot more. We're going to start to see what the playoffs, possible playoff teams are going to look like, who have been pretenders, who are contenders this year. But I think the big one is the Heisman Trophy. This time last year we knew a pretty good idea who at least the nominees were going to be. If the season ended right now, I don't think I could tell you the 4, 5 best players in college football. There's about 10 guys that you could probably throw in there and have a valid argument for, which is so crazy for a college football season because by now we're expecting who the top 4 teams are. Like, oh, okay, one of these 5 teams are going to make the playoffs. But, you touched a lot on, the Heisman and the playoffs, and we're going to get into that because we have a big week of games. Let's get into some of the games. That is why everybody loves this show, or more so why I love this show. We'll start off with probably the boringest game of the week, but it's always, I like to pay dividends to the G5. Our G5 game of the week, Louisiana Monroe, Coastal Carolina. Who do you got in this one?
Oh, you got to go with Coastal Carolina, I think. Grayson McCall, that's another name for the 2022 quarterback class to keep an eye on. So he's leading them in. So that's where I'm going to go with are they not the Chanticleers, or am I thinking of the wrong school?
I think you're thinking of the wrong school.
Okay.
But I don't really know, man. It's just by the school.
Okay. No, but Coastal Carolina, yeah. No, I think they're number 17 in the nation. So I'm going to take them.
Yeah, they've been one of those teams for the last year, especially last year. I feel last year was the year of the G5 schools. They were getting all the attention, but they, for some reason, were like not in that top tier of G5 schools. And I feel, again, this year they're the same way. But they just want to prove of like how dominant of a team they are. They can run the ball almost as good as any team in the country right now. And I think one person that's not getting as much attention is head coach Jamie Chadwell, who's, taken a program that's been very mediocre and is now having them into a very top tier G5 program and arguably a top 10 team. You have to go Coastal Carolina in this game. There's no other option to go with.
I agree, man.
Yeah.
Same page.
Yeah, I'm not sure why I spend so much time on the G5, but I went to Marshall, so I always got to give them the G5 love and attention.
I went to OU, so we are natural rivals, and so
I know
Battle of the Bricks, or I think maybe
a bell. It's a bell.
Bell, yes.
I remember my first year.
College, it was Byron Leftwich was in school at Marshall, and Marshall was still the Mack. So I remember it. We got annihilated because my senior year was when Frank Solich came in, and he kind of turned the program around. But we were an absolute laughingstock before his tenure. So but I do remember the rivalry, and I remember Byron Leftwich.
My first game when I was at Marshall was against OU in 2019. And I'm like, I'm getting all hyped on Marshall football. Like, all I really know is we are Marshall in the plane crash. And I'm like, everyone's like, oh, but we play for a bell. I'm like, oh, you play for a bell? Like, is that the big game of the year? We're gonna play for a bell. But I just remember going in this last offseason when Marshall was looking for a coach, and there was a petition to get Byron Leftwich to be the head coach. And I remember one of my friends who's close in the athletic department said they reached out to him, they called him, and the conversation lasted about 30 minutes because apparently being Tom Brady's offensive coordinator is better than being the head coach at your alma mater. But, we're all entitled to our opinions.
Yeah, he might be right skirting around an NFL head coaching job. So I certainly – there might be a point in time where he lands in the right place to be the Marshall coach. But if you're in the path that you're the offensive coordinator for the Super Bowl champions, the ability to become an NFL head coach is right there at your fingertips.
Yeah, absolutely. I guess, just really shitty timing for us that, Tom Brady decides to go to Tampa Bay where he was a pretty mediocre offensive coordinator. So, I think just really bad timing. But, I'm optimistic. The other hopeful was Chad Pennington, and he tweeted out saying he was no go. But we got his son to commit, so that was the one joy. But we'll move on to another game, the Friday night game. This game very special to me. One, because my little sister goes to Maryland. She would be probably very pissed off if I chose Iowa. So I'm just gonna brace for tomorrow when she tells me I'm an asshole and all the other mean words. I gotta go with number 5 Iowa. As much as I love Maryland this year, Taluya, to his brother, is he's a phenomenal quarterback. He wants to kind of make his own path. I'm not to his brother. They're the number 1 passing team in the Big Ten. The receivers, are really I think the best wide receiver core in the Big Ten. I was just too good defensively. I said earlier, I'm a big defense wins championship kind of guys. Iowa's proven time and 10 they're not going to back down to any offense they play. Defense is going to win this game. As much as I love Maryland this year, they're undefeated. They haven't really been tested this year as much. This can be their first big test, but in the end, I think they're going to come out on top.
I'm going to go with Maryland. So it's the Friday night game. It's in
my sister would probably love you so much right now. She's probably mad at me, but she probably loves you.
It's an exclusive window. It seems like weird things happen on those weekday games for the home team, and it just seems like prime for an upset. So I will go ahead and I will ride Maryland. I really like what Mike Loxley is building there, and you mentioned baby Tua. But you also have got Raheem Jarrett and Demas at the wide receivers, so they're able to make plays. And I just think that this is going to be one of those that the home crowd is going to be jazzed to have the number 5 Iowa coming in. I'm not entirely convinced Iowa is exactly the number 5 team in the nation. It's a very odd year for college football right now. And I think that it's something that college football needs, because we are on that same cycle of, okay, well, it's going to be Ohio State, Alabama, Clemson, right, Oklahoma, or Notre Dame. And so it is kind of nice to get a fresh breath of fresh air and kind of go with something a little bit different at the top of the rankings right now. But I think this is going to be upset city in College Park.
Again, if you're right, I'm just gonna look like a terrible brother, which I'm just gonna assume is gonna happen at this point. But you point out Maryland's putting together something special, and granted, they are in a tough situation. They have games against Iowa, Penn State, Ohio State in the near future. They're still, I think, on the very much up and coming in the Big Ten. I remember going into the year, it's like, oh, Maryland is the armpit of the Big Ten. But I realized, I remember last year, they knocked off Penn State. And I know everyone immediately wants to go, 2020 doesn't count. It was COVID year. Yada, yada happened. But then as soon as you want to say, oh, but no, they sucked last year, even though you just made the argument that 2020 shouldn't count. Maryland's building something special, though. And, with Tua's brother at the helm, and he's going to be known as Tua's brother for the rest of his life until he wins the Heisman, which is not going to happen.
Until he's an NFL starting quarterback.
Yeah. Which, honestly, the way he's going, he's having a better career as a quarterback than his brother. When you compare situations, you're at Maryland versus you're at Alabama. It's kind of hard. If you're at Alabama, it's kind of hard to fail sometimes. But, I like what Maryland's building there. And the Big Ten, the top tier Big Ten teams need to keep an eye out on Maryland, because they're not that pushover game where it's an automatic win anymore. But one game, I mentioned the Big Ten. One team that was expected to just walk away with the championship game is not performing like we expected them to, and another up and coming team in the Big Ten, number 11 Ohio State, traveling to New Brunswick, New Jersey, against the Rutgers Scarlet Knights. Who do you got in this one?
Yeah, it's going to be depend who the Ohio State's going to win the game. It's just going to be whether or not they cover. Would probably be a question about if they play CJ Stroud. I'm less convinced they're going to cover, but if they play Kyle McCord, that I feel a little bit more confident about that. And something I brought up on Tuesday night, that Ohio State's at the point where they need to change the narrative. And if you play Kyle McCord and he lights it up the second half of the season, once you get into that room with the playoff committee, if they were to run the table in the Big Ten, they have a major talking point that to say that this is a different team with Kyle McCord at quarterback than the team that we saw lose to Oregon with CJ Stroud at quarterback. And so I think that maybe that Ryan Day's got to think about that a little bit in his decision making on who he's going to go with at quarterback. He seems pretty stubborn to want to keep going with Stroud, but he's obviously hurt, and it just seems like the game has gone too fast for him. It's hard to know what to take away with McCord because, again, they played Akron, and you kind of show up and you're going to beat Akron. But it seemed like he settled in, and it seemed like he was making some throws that I don't know that Stroud seems brave enough to even attempt right now, much less the velocity that McCord is able to put on the ball.
Yeah, I remember watching Kyle McCord in high school. His high school and my high school were big rivals. I remember watching some highlights, and he just plays the game like so relaxed, and it seems just so natural to him. But, I didn't really know much about CJ Stroud going into the year, but so I'm like, all right, he gets the job. I'm like, all right, he must be better than this quarterback. I think he's also in a tough boat because you're replacing the best quarterback in program history in Justin Fields. It's a very tough, room to fill. We talk about Spencer Rattler trying to live up to expectations. Is CJ Stroud the same kind of player? Is like, are we just overhyping a really not good quarterback? We saw what Justin Fields did at Ohio State. It's easy to expect we're going to expect the same thing out of him. But it's like, oh, well, Justin Fields is the best quarterback, so it should be just a step below. Well, a step below the greatest quarterback in Ohio State history is still a pretty big podium to sit on. And the way he plays, he doesn't play like the hype we gave him, which is, he's falling into the Spencer Rattler situation. Is he's not this great quarterback. So, like you said, I don't think there's a situation where Ohio State can lose this game. Greg Schiano is building a winning program back at Rutgers, but they're not there yet. If Kyle McCord plays, this game's a lot further apart. But if CJ Stroud plays or hurts CJ Stroud especially, this game's a lot closer going into the fourth quarter.
Yeah, I agree.
It's Ohio State's on the decline, unfortunately, but they are still well.
Now, wait a minute. So
to be fair, a decline for Ohio State football level.
Defensively, absolutely. So defense, there's some major questions and major concerns on that side of the ball. And
there's 3 games of sides of football, though. 3 sides. You can't just rely on the offense. You can't do the Lincoln Riley, Oklahoma strategy. We just put up 100 points.
Well, they changed play calling duties to Matt Barnes, and the defenses looked better the last 2 weeks, but they also weren't playing Oregon the last 2 weeks.
True.
They're very, very young on that side of the ball, and I think you see the linebackers, Dallas Nat, transferred before the game, and then the other dude that walked off and quit during the game, I'm blanking on his name. But yeah,
it isn't worth us mentioning his name.
Those are both senior linebackers, and so they clearly were not stepping up. And so I believe what happened is they shuffled the play calling duties, gave it to Barnes, viewed him as the future at that position as defense coordinator. Kerry Combs is he's a great guy to have around your program, but I don't think schematically he was really running it at a point where you were going to do a whole lot. I think he's a fantastic recruiter, and he's done a great job of bringing in defensive back talent since he came back. They're very young in the secondary. So they lost Josh Proctor, which was a big loss. They lost Cameron Brown before the season. That was another loss. And so you're clipping off guys that you were expecting to be leaders in the secondary. You were already resetting the linebacker room because you lost Tup Borland, you lost Pete Warner. So several of those guys, Malik Harrison the year before. And so they've had a lot of experience go through that position. So it's a little bit of a reset on that side of the ball. Offensively, outside of the quarterback, I mean, you can't really get it's the best wide receiver room in college and probably arguably the best offensive line in college, even if we haven't seen them perform up to that level. And you see Travion Henderson coming in, and he looks like the next coming of LaDainian Tomlinson right now.
Yeah.
Freshman. I mean, he is phenomenal. So, all the pieces are there offensively. Whether or not the defense can hold enough up enough. But it really just comes down to that quarterback position right now, because again, you talk about Justin Fields, and I firmly believe that if Justin Fields was a quarterback, they hang 63 on Oregon, and it's one of those where you're like, man, maybe the defense needs to get a little bit better, but we just scored 63 points on Oregon and beat them by 4 touchdowns, and maybe we just need to worry about that when we play Alabama type thing. So I think it got magnified there.
Yeah, absolutely. It's Ohio State. They need to get better on defense. There's no hiding it. Especially with teams on the schedule. With Penn State, who has a great offensive going right now. When I said like Ohio State's on the decline, I think for this year it's going to be looked off as an off year for Ohio State, which is still going to end up probably as a top 10 team. But in Ohio State standards, they were one of those teams that was championship or bust seasons. And C.J. Stroud is supposed to be the next best quarterback for Ohio State. Again, a school that's had success as college quarterbacks. Dwayne Haskins was a good college quarterback. JT Barrett. Yeah, him too. Cardell Jones, Braxton Miller. So, going back 10 years, this team was always good at the quarterback position. So it was kind of similar to Oklahoma's. This was the next best quarterback for us. They're going to lead us to the promised land kind of a deal. And he didn't deliver. And, they had the early loss to Oregon. And again, it's like, okay, was Ohio State just not playing well, or is Oregon just a really good team? But then Ohio State comes out and just doesn't dominate these small end teams like we expect them to. Like, I expected them to hang 70 on Akron. Okay, that defense isn't there. The offense's spark wasn't there. So, again, Ohio State's going to win this game with ease, but whoever's at quarterback is going to dictate if this game's won by 30 points or if this game's won by 3 points. But another team that's kind of just not lived up to expectations, and I think is on more of an upset watch than ever, Oklahoma versus Kansas State. This Oklahoma defense was supposed to be the defense that won Lincoln Riley a championship. They're not playing to that standard. The offense is not playing up to Oklahoma standards. Kansas State's a sneaky team. They're not going to back down to it. I really hate Spencer Rattler at this point. I'm going to go crazy. I'm going for the Wildcats. I'm going upset city.
Yeah, I'm still going to go Oklahoma in this matchup, even though it does seem like the two teams that give Lincoln Riley and Oklahoma the biggest trouble have been Kansas State and Iowa State in the regular season the last couple of years. It just seems like those teams have a little bit of a different recipe than what you're used to seeing in the Big 12. But to be fair, Oklahoma looks like they're almost in that more of that recipe this year than what they normally are. And so, they've been living on the edge, and certainly I can understand the argument that they're due to fall off one of these times, but you can also make the same argument that it's Oklahoma and they're due to wake up and they're due to hang 63 on one of these teams too. And so until they do lose, we saw Kansas State struggle last week against Oklahoma State. And so I'm not, they lost their quarterback a couple weeks ago, and now they're playing Will Howard at quarterback. I'm not quite there on Kansas State to be pulling the upset.
Yeah, I think it's gonna be a lot closer matchup, but I really just hate Spencer Rattler at this point. He's so overhyped
too.
I just hate him.
Cheer against them, so I'd love to see him knocked off.
Yeah, he's overhyped. They're not a good team, especially because they're my national champion pick this year, and it's obviously I'm not going to be right on that. So really not happy with them. But one thing we were talking about earlier in the show is this week is the playoff picture is going to become a lot more clear. We're going to see who the real pretenders are and the real contenders are in one game that you think people don't realize has so much playoff implications. One team is trying to say, hey, by the way, we've been playing elite football for the last 2 years. Start noticing us. And one team saying, hey, we're usually really overrated, but we're actually semi-decent this year. Cincinnati versus Notre Dame. This is a weird matchup. Who do you think has the edge on this game?
Well, it's interesting too because Notre Dame's defense coordinator is Marcus Freeman, who they just
Yeah.
hired in Cincinnati, and so I think that adds to the dynamic a little bit. Notre Dame, that's another program that they could be sitting on 2 losses very easily right now to bad teams, to Florida State and to Toledo, and they got lucky to avoid those losses in the first couple of weeks. We kind of saw things click against Wisconsin, but at the same time, that was 13-10 going into the fourth quarter, and then Graham Mertz just fell apart. Special teams fell apart, allowed a kick return touchdown. Graham Mertz threw 2 pick sixes, and it ended up. That's one of those that if you weren't watching that game and you just kind of glance through the box score and you see, oh wow, Notre Dame 41-13 over Wisconsin, they've got it rolling now, and I'm not quite sure that I'm there on that. But again, Cincinnati, arguably they should have lost to Indiana. There was that game seemed like it was almost on the verge of getting away from them. Indiana failed to convert in several big instances early in the game. They could have been up 28-0 on Cincinnati, and it could have, this whole Cinderella season could be completely over. And so both of these teams, I don't know, we've seen their best football. Now, if they show up and both play their best football, I really like Cincinnati to win the game. And so, we talked about Ritter before. They've got Jerome Ford in the backfield. Notre Dame's offense has kind of seemed to struggle to put it all together with their transition to Jack Cohn or whoever's playing quarterback this week. If it's Drew Pine or if it's Tyler Buchner, I'm not sure who. I think it's going to be Cohn. But again, he left.
Cohn said that he's the leader he said he's expected to play, so he should be playing on Saturday.
Yeah, so I just think it's one of those that if we get Cincinnati's best game, I like them to win this game. And so it's one of those two that with how good Georgia's looked this year, Cincinnati could have won that game at the end of last year against Georgia in the Sugar Bowl. You almost wonder if the narrative would be even more in their favor, but this absolutely feels like a playoff game in the first weekend of October, because certainly Cincinnati won't recover from a loss, but it's an open question. Notre Dame without a conference championship and without really a quality win on their schedule, if they don't win this game, if they're 11-1, their season's pretty well over too.
Yeah, I think 2 areas of the game that I think people are going to overlook is the Cincinnati left and right tackle. They're not strong there. They got beat a lot. And you mentioned a little bit of the struggles against Indiana. Their big struggles were on the left and right tackle. They were getting beat a lot. Indiana's a different team than Notre Dame. Notre Dame's a lot more physical. But one name for Notre Dame that, a player that Desmond Ritter hasn't faced, Kyle Hamilton. He's well on his way to being a top 10 talent. He's so good. He's so electric. He can get from sideline to sideline so easily. He catches the ball so quick, with ease. Desmond Ritter hasn't faced a player like Kyle Hamilton before. If Kyle Hamilton can step up and disrupt Desmond Ritter, Notre Dame can find a way to win this. But if Desmond Ritter comes out and plays at that elite quarterback one talent that I think he has, it's going to show holes in Kyle Hamilton's game. So it really comes down to, is Desmond Ritter going to play better, or is Kyle Hamilton going to play better? But I'm going to actually take Cincinnati in this game. I consider making this the G5's game of the week, since technically Notre Dame's not a Power 5 team. But when all the Power 5 conferences require a non-conference game and Notre Dame fulfills that requirement, in the official bylaws of my brain, they're no longer a G5 team. But I'm sticking with the G5. I'm going to go with Cincinnati. This is their statement victory. Hopefully the playoff committee, thinks that as well, but there's a good chance they don't. But big topic of the week, the big week. This is the week for the SEC.
Yes.
Big game. Alabama, Ole Miss. Before we get to the actual game, there's 2 players I want to talk about. Bryce Young, Matt Corral, whatever his name is, will the Heisman Trophy be won during this game? Every player that's won the Heisman has had their Heisman signature game. Is that in this game?
It's still very early in the season.
Mhm.
So, and it's one of those that the September Heisman never wins the Heisman. And Matt Corral is arguably sitting on the September Heisman. I think both of these guys might be tied in Heisman odds right now. It's fair. Yeah. If Matt Corral wins this game and goes on and has a solid numbers wide season and Ole Miss is able to, then certainly this could be the moment where we say, yeah, he won the Heisman in this game. I do think that Bryce Young might need to continue on in order to get it. It's one of those that if they're 12-0, then especially in this year where there's no other clear candidate, then he's got Bryce Young is going to win the Heisman. So, it's fair. Yeah, I think I can get there that the Heisman might be won in this game.
Yeah, I keep thinking I'm big on the highs. I always love the awards. So I always trying to who are your top players. Going into the year again, it was Spencer Rattler, Sam Howell, Malik Willis made a couple appearances. But right now there's a clear top two. It's Bryce Young and Matt Corral. I can't really think of any quarterback or player right now that could make that jump into this conversation. And when you come down to it, neither one of them's having an incredible year. They're having good years, but they're not having the years that we saw of some previous Heisman winning quarterbacks. So it's going to come down to who's going to win this game. At the end of the year, I think they're going to be pretty evenly matched quarterbacks when you look at numbers and just overall performance. And the best argument the other one's going to have is, hey, I beat the other potential candidate for the award. I think I also mentioned the September Heisman Trophy went to Matt Corral. There's more months than September. After the first game, everyone was ready to give it to Bryce Young. Bryce Young hasn't lived up to, he pretty dumb. He set the bar really high. He should have, waited till, the last week against Auburn to do that kind of stuff. But, I'm not the coaches at Alabama, but it almost has to be obvious. Whoever wins this game is going to win the Heisman unless, crazy circumstances.
Yeah, I agree.
Again, even though this game has big Heisman Trophy, implications, the more important thing that these teams care about, this game has playoff implications on it. Ole Miss is one of those teams that's hey, we're knocking on the door as well of not just the SEC, but the the college football. With Alabama and Ole Miss playing this week, this game obviously it's a big game. Who wins this game for you?
I think Alabama's going to win. The last line that I saw was 14.5, and I'm taking Ole Miss in that situation. We saw Lane Kiffin give them problems last year. We know that Matt Corral is a guy that he played well last year to give them some problems in that game. And so I think that they're going to play well enough to keep it close and make it very interesting. Bama didn't exactly look like Bama when they played Florida in week 2. That felt like one of those that, week 1 when they played Miami, they looked fantastic. But then I think that we can question whether Miami was a little bit overrated going into that game for the TV purposes of week 1.
Well, they're losing right now 30-28. So that kind of says a little bit about Miami.
Yeah. So, I would take Alabama to win the game. I would take Ole Miss I don't think Alabama is going to cover that 14.5 points. And I think this is going to be a very entertaining game, a very back and forth game. It's rare because one of the things that I write in the Fantasy Pros Devi Primer, and I talked about last week, how it seems like defense has taken over college football versus it was always the offensive revolution and the spread offense and everything. Really seems like, I don't know if it's just the new quarterbacks at the big schools or if it's just the added experience at some other schools because of the COVID year and guys are able to come back, have an extra year of eligibility. But it does seem like defense is dominating, but this is going to be the one game this year, one big game where I think we can feel pretty comfortably that the offenses are going to show up and show out.
Yeah, You nailed it right on the coffin. This is going to be an offensive game. One thing we got to remember is what Lane Kiffin did to this Alabama our defense last year. Put up a crazy amount. I think it was like 600 yards on Alabama. It was an insane number. That's what this game is going to come down to. Which offense can tear down the defense better? And Lane Kiffin's going to have them prepared. He's going to have that offense ready. They're going to, slow Alabama down. But in the end, Alabama's defense is just too good. Just too much strength that they're going to slow them down, but they're not going to slow them down enough to win the game. So I think you have to stick with Alabama, but it's going to show Alabama's semi-weaknesses kind of going forward. But this isn't a game that we kind of had circled on our calendars to start the year because we didn't think Ole Miss was going to be like this. We didn't think Matt Corral was going to be the type of player he is. One game that I definitely didn't have circled on my calendar, which is our game of the week. Another game that's not going to have just implications on the SEC, but all of college football. Georgia takes on Arkansas. What are your thoughts on this game?
I think it's the line that I saw is wild, 18.5 points, because
I'm taking that bet.
I was going to say
I'm taking the under
about that. You hit if Arkansas hit 17 points, then you're looking at Georgia needs to put up 36 points to cover that 18.5. And against this Arkansas defense, it's fair to question. JT Daniels is a guy that I'm not very high on, to be honest with you. I think that we saw the Clemson game. He has a tendency, he's going to throw to his first read. And if it's not there, he kind of panics a little bit. And that Clemson game, this defense is amazing for Georgia. And so that's going to be the real question. But the defense is good for Arkansas too. Turnovers decide big games. And so my concern on the Arkansas standpoint to actually take them to win outright, we've seen KJ Jefferson get a little bit, he gets a little bit risky with the ball. And so I could see a situation where Georgia ends up with a couple defensive touchdowns and they put it away that way. But again, I really enjoy this Arkansas team. Sam Pittman's a lot of fun as a coach. They bring a lunch pail mentality. I think they should be the number 3 team in the nation. I feel that very comfortably right now. I think that if you were to put them on a neutral field with Penn State or Oregon, I really like their odds to win those games. And it feels like a situation where the pollsters were just wrong on them at the beginning of the season, and they're just not going to give them credit before they get there. But I'm excited for this game, and it's going to be defense. And I do want to a little bit of scenario that I've been running around in my head is if Arkansas wins this game, and then they go through, they lose to Alabama, and they finish the season 11-1, and they're sitting on wins over Ole Miss, Georgia, Texas A&M, Texas. Alabama goes 12-0, and they go to the SEC championship game where they meet 11-1 Georgia. Georgia knocks them off, wins the SEC, and you've got all 3 of these teams sitting here at 12-1 or 11-1. Might we be seeing 3 teams in the college football playoff from the SEC? I think that there's certainly a lot of football to be played and upsets and whatever else might happen, but there is that, there's that potential where all 3 of these teams are sitting there in the college football playoff.
Yeah, first of all, you took I had that question prepared for you. Like, what if Arkansas wins this game? Like, what's the future for the SEC? Because I think it's clear Alabama's the top team right now, and I truly think they're going to walk to kind of say 12-0. But if Arkansas wins, it's like they have all these big wins. Okay, they're going to lose to probably Alabama. Okay, your one loss is to the best team in the country. It's like, okay, well, maybe you just weren't that good. Wins against Georgia, wins against Ole Miss. Who else? Texas A&M. They're big wins. It's like, okay, yeah, we lost the game, but are we better than an undefeated, Penn State team who, beat a bunch of teams, Penn or Ohio State and Michigan? I think if Arkansas wins this game and everything that you played out, we will 100% see 3 teams from the SEC. Just because if the college football playoff committee wants to say, like, we're going to live up to what we say and say that we want the 3 best teams, At that point, the three best teams are Alabama, Georgia, and Arkansas, which all three teams are showing. The big debate is who's that fourth team. I think it's going to be Penn State at this point because Ohio State's not that strong. Sorry, I know. Again, Columbus guy. If Christian's watching, he's probably on his way to fire me because I bashed Ohio State. But I mean, if you want to say the best three teams in college football, if Arkansas can win this, and even honestly, if they lose this game, I'm making the argument they're still a top 5 team. If they lose this game by a field goal or a one-score game, just because they're losing these games doesn't mean they're a bad team. You got to look at who are they losing to? Oh, you lost to the best 2 teams in college football? Terrible team. No. Easily could be still the third best team in college football. So if Arkansas shows up and performs and loses the game, I'm still putting them as the number 3 team in the country. And if the playoff committee wants to finally live up to what they say they're going to, we'll see Arkansas playing in the playoffs this year.
An undefeated Power 5 champ is always going to make the playoff. Absent 5 undefeated Power 5 champs, it's just always going to happen. We saw it the Notre Dame game, Notre Dame team 2 years ago, and I think it was Oklahoma. Maybe it was the other team that was kind of right on their heels, and Notre Dame made it in, and we were questioning about whether they were actually good or not, and then. No, Oklahoma made it in. I don't know. I'm blanking on here. There's a random year where we didn't feel comfortable about an undefeated team making it in, and they ended up getting blown out. But it's one of those that as long as there's an undefeated Power 5 champ, they're going to make it in. But at the same time, I don't know that I feel comfortable with Oregon running the table. I don't know if I feel comfortable with Oklahoma running the table, what we've seen so far. And I don't know if I feel comfortable despite, I think, 4-5 undefeated teams currently in the Big Ten, but it's very early. And, I'm still allowing my heart to take over a little bit in the Big Ten just because I've seen something over the several seasons that Ohio State seems to be comfortably ahead. And so I still have some faith, and there's still some time that they're able to put it together and win the Big Ten and not have an undefeated champion out of the Big Ten. But, if it is a situation where you've got multiple teams with one loss and that scenario plays out, then I do think that you're getting 3 teams in from the SEC.
Absolutely. And I think this is not a game we had circled on our calendars to start the year. I apologize to Razorback fans. I didn't think you guys were relevant this year, but Sam Pittman put together a good team. They really utilized the transfer portal and that 6 year of eligibility. So, he put together a good team this year. But I think, this game's going to come down to defense. And I think Georgia has the better defense. Arkansas has a lot of great athletes on the team. They can make plays on the offensive and defensive side of the balls. But I think this game's going to come down to whoever's a stronger defense. And I got to give the edge to the Bulldogs just ever so slightly. I think this game comes down to the wire. But I think, that Georgia defense and, JT Daniels on the offense side of the ball is going to hopefully find a way to get it done. Who do you have winning this game, though?
I have Georgia winning the game. So I think that I like the points. 18.5 is certainly a lot. I think it's going to be a very good game, but I still take that Georgia defense to win this game.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, it's such a big week for the SEC, but just kind of college football. We touched on, the Heisman Trophy, that this is going to be kind of it's going to dictate who's going to win the trophy. This week's kind of going to dictate, playoff implications. We're going to see who the real, top 4 teams are in college football. If, everybody, the favorites win, Alabama wins, Georgia wins, everybody in the top 10 wins the game that you're supposed to. Who are your top 4 teams in college football? Who's making the playoffs?
Who's making the playoffs right now? If I had to say, I would say if Georgia goes 12-0 and loses to Alabama in the championship game, then I've got Alabama, Georgia making the playoffs. Mm-hmm. Maybe the winner out of Cincinnati, Notre Dame, depending if they go undefeated. I just have a hard time believing that we're going to get undefeated Power 5 champions out of the other places. And so Oregon would have to lose twice for OSU to jump them, and so, but I think this Oregon team might be capable of losing twice. It'll be, I'm gonna probably play a homer and take the fourth spot, be Ohio State, just on that name brand recognition. If they were to go 11-1 and run the table through the Big Ten, I think that they sneak in there, especially if they play Kyle McCord and they change that narrative a little bit. Because you just tick teams off, and it seems like the ACC is pretty well out of it. I mean, Clemson's got an uphill battle even to make it to the ACC championship game right now. They need NC State to lose 2 times, and they need to not lose again. And this Clemson team looks possible that they might lose again in conference.
Absolutely.
So you kind of blow that conference out of there. If Notre Dame were to drop a game, I think Cincinnati's the only realistic G5 team that we can talk about making the playoff, because they would have the win over Notre Dame, and the other, there's just not, Coastal Carolina is a fun team. They're not going to make it enough, but
not a chance.
But again, that's counting on a team to go undefeated. And I do think that, in something that I brought up even before the season started, you look at the inexperience at a lot of the top programs, and you look at the extra year that a lot of those teams in the middle got. A lot of those guys that knew they weren't going to the NFL, but they're leaders and they're able to stick around for an extra year. It did feel like coming into this year that, and something that it felt like COVID would affect this year more than it did last year. As screwy, as bizarre as last year was, everything was still kind of running the way that it was, and our playoff field was exactly what we expected it to be. This is the year where it's just that extra eligibility, and the top team still sending their typical guys to the pros, whereas you've got just a lot more experience in those other teams, the Iowa team, type like that, where it just does feel like we're set up for 2017 and to get some pretty wild. And so this might go down to the last weekend, and depending on who's going to make it into the field.
Yeah, again, a lot of great points. For me, it's, if everybody goes, wins like they're supposed to, I think obviously the obvious two, Alabama and Georgia, are the top 2 teams in the country. They'll have multiple top 25 wins by then. It doesn't matter who wins the SEC championship game. If they're both 1 and 2, whoever wins is going to be the number 1 team in the country. Whoever loses will be number 3. So they don't play each other in the final games. I mean, a blind person can see that coming. But there's a lot of teams, like, who's going to take that 3 and 4 spot? A team going into the year was, Ohio State, and very much could make a run to a playoff spot. Like, all right, their 1 loss is to Oregon and they play out. Oh, our 1 loss is to a number 3 Oregon team. Especially, again, if Kyle McCord plays, he's better than CJ McCord. They have the best wide receiver room. If they knock off Penn State, knock off Michigan, there's 2 big top 25 teams that we've knocked off, especially with Penn State being as good as they are. Like, their offense is looking really good. Again,
well, especially if Iowa runs the table and they're 12-0 and they're sitting there that last weekend, and it's a battle of number 4 Iowa versus number 5 Ohio State, and in the Big Ten championship game, that's going to be a play-in game.
Again, you hit it right on the coffin. Like, the Big Ten has just as much excitement as the SEC. The SEC has their top teams. The Big Ten is trying to compete for that, that a playoff spot, and it's coming down to Oregon, Penn State, Iowa. Another team that's knocking, Michigan. Michigan goes in, knocks off Penn State, knocks off, Jim Harbaugh defies the odds and finally beats Ohio State. There's some, a lot of big wins he has on his play. Like, hey, we beat the number 4 Penn State, the team that had a great offense. Their defense is playing phenomenal. Brent Pry is on his way to a head coaching job the next year or 2. But if Jim Harbaugh saves his job and goes undefeated, you got to throw them into the equation. Even though it's Michigan, we know they're not going to end up doing it because Jim Harbaugh can't beat Ohio State, because I know that makes you very happy. But, you mentioned like a lot of other teams. I think the ACCs, they set SOL to their playoff spot. North Carolina and Clemson, the 2 teams that were supposed to both make the playoffs, not going to make it this year. Pac-12, they have Oregon, but you never can trust the Pac-12 in any situation, especially with Kayvon Thibodeau, still kind of hurt. He's a guy that might not, could, influence that team. Whoever wins the Big Ten, I think, is going to make the playoffs, and it comes back to it. I could see a 2-loss, 1-loss SEC school making it over a Pac-12 champion just because of how dominant of a conference it is.
Yeah. I agree.
Yeah, again, it's a crazy week for college football. I think, a lot more stuff's going to be clear. I'm not quite sure at the top of my head when the playoff rankings are going to start to come out, but we're going to start to get a good understanding of everything. And one thing going into this year was everyone's like, oh, well, last year they sucked, but it's COVID, so it doesn't really matter. And one team was like Penn State, like, oh, they started 0-5, but they started 0-4, but it's a COVID year. But these next few weeks are going to start to really show you who are the pretenders and who are the contenders. Big weeks in the SEC this week. Big Ten has a lot of big games. Like we mentioned a lot of it. Like, is there a game in the Big Ten that you have circled, 20 times on your calendar as this is going to determine the playoffs?
Probably Ohio State, Penn State right now.
Mm-hmm. Again, I believe is that game in Columbus or is it in Penn State this year? Has to be Columbus.
It's in Columbus. It's in Columbus because I went to the game 2 years ago in Columbus. So I think, they played at Happy Valley last year. So Columbus this year.
Yeah, I keep forgetting stuff with last year. Just wasn't a typical whiteout situation for Penn State. But, I get in arguments with my friends all the time that they say Penn State's not legit, but Penn State's putting up pretty good numbers this year. I want to just be like, follow the crowd and say it's going to be Alabama, Georgia. Is Penn State good enough to possibly beat one of them and make a championship game run?
Yeah, well, we've already seen them beat Auburn, and they've got the wide receiver talent. They've got I can't really get there on Clifford, but
he's a decent quarterback in a good system.
Yeah, I agree.
What Spencer Rattler almost is, but just not the good quarterback part.
Yeah, no, I agree with that.
Yeah, again, I don't think that I love Penn State. I've been a fan the whole time, but I don't think they're the team that could possibly beat Georgia or Alabama. I mean, I still think Alabama's walking to another championship, just the way things are going. But I'm excited for this week. You got any final things to watch, or just for fans if they want to pay attention to for a big week 5?
The games we ran through, I think it's a great weekend to. There's going to be some good game on. Like regardless,
yeah.
If one of these games turns into a blowout, there's going to be, we didn't talk about Michigan playing Wisconsin and some of these other games that might fly under the radar. That it's going to be a really good weekend to be at the TV and flip in between some games, and you're going to have some great finishes that are going to go a long way towards deciding who is going to be in the playoff field.
Yeah, this is I feel there's a lot more excitement for this week than I've had for a long time. Mine is obviously week 1 because that's week 1, but not only like as a college football fan, but just as a football fan, we get to watch a lot of great games. And even you said like there's really all season long been that one game. It's like, oh, this is the one game we're gonna watch this week, and then the game doesn't become that exciting. It's like 4 or 5 games that you like. All right, this is gonna be a really good game. I'm gonna make sure I watch this game, but I'm excited for a fun week 5. It was, a crazy week 4, but week 5 is gonna, turn out to be a lot of fun one. We're getting towards the end of our show. Jeff, thank you so much for, joining us today. Next week we'll have Jerred back, but I'm sure we'll have you back on as a guest. Very knowledgeable, good friend of the cut. Thanks to Mr. Christian Williams because bless him for everything. But where can we find you for more of your content?
Yeah, so you can find me on Twitter at For Whom J Bell Tolls. You can find me with Fantasy Pros doing a lot of content out of there, especially Devy minded right now. I've put some content up with football guys you can find on that website. And then Tuesday nights we do the show 9:30, the Devy Royale with Christian and Kevin Coleman at the Boys 22. And then at 7:00, I'm on another show, Coming Off the Edge. It's a group of friends that we get together and we talk about whatever strikes our mind in football that week. And then you can also find I'll put out some content with Betting Pros. I do some game previews over there. So just kind of a little bit all over the place, but mainly Twitter would be the way to find me. But content is always coming out.
Awesome, man. Yeah, listen, there's not many shows I like to watch on Twitter, on Periscope and stuff, but I truthfully not. No, I don't want to give Christian too much credit, but the Devy Royale is one of those shows that I definitely always circle on my calendar each week. But it was great to have you on. Such a have an opportunity to just talk college football from a fan standpoint. You truthfully can't beat that opportunity. But next week we'll be joined back by Jerred. He'll be back to join us. Jeff, thank you again for joining us. It has been a pleasure to have you. We'll be back next week for another great week. We'll recap week 5, look ahead to week 6, any big other news. But for Adam Mack and Mr. Jeff Bell, this is the College Football Cut. We will see you next week.